The atmosphere on the Steve Harvey show was electric when Karoline Leavitt arrived. The audience was excited to see how smart she would be, what behind-the-scenes anecdotes she would share from the White House, and how charming she would be as a young politician creating history. Steve was prepared to take the lead with his humor and heartfelt grin. However, everything stopped as Karoline sat down, and her eyes unintentionally caught the glimmer of the cross on Steve's chest. Meaning, breath, and space. Since Steve Harvey would not be the one asking questions for the next several minutes, what had begun as a light-hearted conversation was going to take a more serious turn. He would be the one attempting to suppress his tears. Everything would change when Karoline said it, and it started with a startling declaration. "Steve, I'd want to share with you something I've never discussed on TV. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss the newest tales, and leave a comment indicating where you are seeing the article before you begin." Steve Harvey wore a sleek gray suit that hugged his body and held a stack of question cards as he entered the stage with his signature smile. Cheers filled the studio as the audience exploded in applause. Steve added, "Today we've got a special guest," in a kind yet enthusiastic tone. This young woman, Karoline Leavitt, is upending the political landscape as the youngest White House press secretary in history. As Karoline emerged, the cheers erupted once more. Her physique was accentuated by her sophisticated blue outfit. Blonde hair pulled back carefully. She was grinning broadly, yet there was a tinge of strain in her eyes. Steve gave her a playful glance. "The White House employs this child." I was still learning how to wield a microphone at her age. There was a lively atmosphere in the studio as the audience erupted in laughter. Steve Harvey leaned closer, Karoline Leavitt, as the stage lights dimmed. His eyes were sharper now, as though he was anxious to learn more about the young woman in front of him. Curiosity replaced the clapping as the audience became silent. "Karoline, you are the youngest White House press secretary in history," Steve stated after softly tapping his question cards on his knee. "How do you enter that world of elderly people and all that pressure?" "It sounds like a Hollywood film," Karoline said, with a little giggle that was both self-assured and modest. "Steve, my family sold ice cream and vintage vehicles in the little town where I grew up. Although I never saw myself sitting in the White House, I enjoy a challenge and think that anyone, regardless of age, can make a difference if they put in the necessary effort." Steve nodded, his hand involuntarily touching the cross on his chest. "I like that spirit," she said. "But hold on, I have to ask. What about being a mom? I heard you just had a little boy, right? How do you balance raising a kid and running a whole press team at the White House?" He tilted his head, his eyes curious yet empathetic, as if recalling his own hectic days raising 7 kids. "Some days I'm meeting with the president's team, and then home changing diapers at midnight, but I love both roles. I think being a mom teaches me patience, and politics teaches me to never give up." Karoline laughed louder this time, a hint of shyness in it. "It's definitely a challenge. My son Nico is small, only a few months old." The audience erupted in laughter, and Steve joined in, his easy laugh lightening the mood in the studio. "Oh, I lose my mind plenty, but I've got a trick." She paused, looking at Steve. "You've got 7 kids, right? How do you not lose your mind?" she asked. Karoline nodded, her eyes darkening for a moment. "Yes, Steve. I get a lot of criticism. People say I'm too young, inexperienced, that a girl like me doesn't belong in politics." He winked at the crowd before becoming serious. "But for real, Karoline, I admire you. Being a mom is tough. Working at the White House is tougher. And you're so young. There must be some pressure, right?" Eyeing. She spoke resolutely, her hands clenching on her lap for emphasis, and Steve listened, his hand brushing the cross again, his thumb grazing its metal surface. He sensed the resilience in her voice, but also a hint of vulnerability, as if she were concealing a larger story. Sometimes I wonder if I'm enough, but then I remember that youth isn't a weakness, it's a strength if you know how to use it. Steve, that's a big question, and to be honest, part of the answer has to do with you. Karoline looked at him, her eyes brightening as if she'd found the right person to confide in. I understand, he said, his tone deeper. I've been told I wasn't good enough, smart enough for anything but comedy. But how do you push past that? What keeps you standing? She stopped, allowing the words to linger in the air, and the audience started to whisper. Steve raised an eyebrow, startled, and said, Has to do with me? What are you saying? He leaned closer, his hand dropping the cross, and his eyes were fixed on her. She smiled, a smile that was both gentle and powerful. I remember seeing you on TV once, not in a comedy, but when you discussed life and faith. Steve sat up straight, his hand instinctively clutching the question cards. Wait, are you serious? I was in a really dark place then, and you didn't know it, but what you said pulled me out of it. Her voice trailed off, heavy with emotion, and the stage lights appeared to focus just on the two of them. With a quivering voice, he inquired. Sensing the change in the atmosphere, the audience went silent, not out of skepticism, but out of amazement. Karoline nodded, her eyes staring at him. Dead serious, Steve. And I'll tell you how it changed me in a few minutes. Steve inhaled deeply, his smile disappearing as emotion and curiosity took its place. Steve Harvey sat motionless, hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes fixed on Karoline Leavitt, his usual grin gone, replaced by a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. The studio audience hushed, no more whispers. All right, he said, his voice warm and low. I'm listening. He set the cards down as if knowing from this moment on that the interview would not follow any script. With her hands clasped tightly in her lap, Karoline took a deep breath and spoke in a steady, low voice. Steve, you asked what keeps me standing. Karoline looked directly at him and said, I want to tell you a story about a time I wasn't sure I could keep going. It was as if she sensed that this young woman was about to open an unexpected door. She paused, her lips pressed together as if the memory still stung, and Steve tilted his head, his gaze softening. I know that feeling, he said quietly, but losing ain't easy. Karoline nodded, a faint, sad smile crossing her face. It was when I ran for Congress back home. I was young, full of fire, and believed I could change things. But then I lost bad. The media didn't let up, writing nasty things like, she's too young, she doesn't know what she's doing, and women like her don't belong in politics. I had put everything into it, traveling, meeting people, and talking about my beliefs. But when the results came in, I didn't just lose the seat, I lost faith in myself. She lowered her head, her blonde hair falling slightly over her face, and every word felt like a knife to my self-worth. I went home, sat in my family's small living room, and stared out the window while it was raining, and I felt like the entire world was falling apart. I asked myself, what was all this for? Am I even deserving? I was raised in a typical family, not wealthy, not influential, and without any support. Right then, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. The audience let out soft, a few young women bowing their heads in empathy. Steve sat up straighter, his hand unconsciously touching the cross on his chest as if seeking an anchor. Karoline, he said, his voice warm and deep. You're not the first to feel that, but how do you overcome it? She raised her head, her eyes clearer but still shaking. My family was worried, but I didn't want them to see me weak, so I sat there for hours without talking to anyone or answering my phone. I felt like I'd failed them and myself, so I turned on the TV one night, not to watch anything specific, but just to fill the void. I didn't get past it right away, Steve. I don't know exactly what it was, maybe an old clip, or you speaking to an audience, but there you were on stage in a suit holding a microphone talking about life. Karoline smiled, a small but genuine smile. She paused, looking at Steve with a meaningful gaze. And that's when I saw you. Steve raised an eyebrow, surprised. I sat on that worn-out couch listening to everything you said, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope come into my heart. Steve leaned forward, hands on the table, eyes fixed on her. "You're serious?" he questioned, sounding as though he was incredulous. "I don't know when you recorded it, but it hit me right when I needed it most." Karoline said, "Dead serious," her voice harsher. "Sometimes we don't have to be perfect. Just keep going." I wasn't sure if I could get back up at the time because I had lost, been chastised, and questioned myself, but your words were like a beacon of hope. That night, things began to change. The audience was dead silent, with some wiping away tears and others nodding as her story hit home. Steve looked at her, his eyes softening, the playful vibe gone. "Karoline," he said, his voice rough. Tears streamed down my face, not out of despair, but because I realized I still had a reason to try. "You have no idea how much it means to me." "How can I change you?" Karoline asked him, her eyes brimming with passion. "I chose not to let failure define me, so I went back to work, joined the president's team, and ended up where I am today," Steve said. "It gave me the strength to stand up again." Steve remained still, his hand gripping the cross, his lips squeezed together as though suppressing emotion. "But it all began with you, with what you said, with the faith you passed on without even knowing." His voice broke, and he mumbled, "I don't know what to say." Karoline grinned, her eyes sparkling with tears. "Steve, you've spoken enough, and I'm here to thank you, so you don't need to say anything more." Steve Harvey sat silently, holding the crucifix in his palm, his eyes displaying a mixture of grief and shock. Feeling the weight of what Karoline Leavitt had just said, the studio audience appeared to hold their breath. She had talked about how he had unintentionally been a light in her gloom when she lost the election. She looked directly into his eyes now, as though to make him realize that this was more than simply appreciation. She had never dreamed of such a bond. Steve Karoline spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "You must comprehend this. I was listening to more than just a presenter that evening when I heard you talk. It was someone who, like me, had experienced hardship. Your comments gave me hope that I still had a chance to continue, and they were like a hand dragging me out of despair." Steve moved to the front. As though wishing to close the distance between them, his hand moved away from the cross and settled on the table. His voice still struggling with the notion that his words had such force, he said, "You're serious?" Karoline nodded, a soft grin forming over her lips. "I mean, I talk about that stuff a lot, but I didn't think it had reached someone like you." Steve looked at her, his lips pressed tight, as if he were suppressing emotion. "I'm serious, Steve. I can't forget that feeling like someone finally saw through me. Not the girl the press tore apart, but me. Someone lost. You talked about keeping going and it woke me up. I thought if he's right, then I can't give up." "Karoline," he began in a shaky voice, "you sensed it from me. Simply said, I speak for myself. I'd broken off communication with everyone because I didn't want to face anyone. That's all." She nodded, her eyes gleaming with honesty. "That's precisely why it's remarkable, Steve, because you talked from yourself." Steve sat up straighter, his thumb grazing the cross as if seeking comfort. "So, what did you do after that?" he asked, his voice deeper, wanting to know that the story didn't just end with fleeting emotion. "But your voice was like a spark, making me cry again, not from sadness, but because I saw I still had a reason to try. And I did." Karoline's expression was one of pride. "Steve," I began afresh. "Not immediately. I am not superhuman. However, I allowed the light in by opening the window the following day. I informed my folks over the phone that I was okay. I came up with a fresh strategy and re-entered politics. After that, I joined the president's staff, put in endless hours, and eventually made it to this point. You were the one who began it all that night with your unknowing trust." A little smile appeared on Steve's face as he shook his head. "Karoline, you've left me speechless. You know, I'm simply a comedy person. I never thought I'd be able to affect someone like you, a youthful, intelligent individual transforming the nation." She cocked her head and fixed her steady gaze on him. "But Steve, that's the magic. You're more than just a comedian. You touch people when they need it most and speak genuine things. When I thought I had nothing left, you were the one who gave me hope. You gave me hope that I could continue, and I did." Steve's eyes were sparkling as he gazed down at the crucifix with his fingers clutching it. His voice broke as he continued, "Karoline, I've run out of things to say. I didn't realize it would mean so much to you, but I wear it because it's important to me." She grinned, her eyes glimmering with tears. "Steve, you don't realize how much it means. I'm here to express my gratitude for transforming me, for giving me the willpower to persevere, and for altering my perspective on the world." Steve sat still, his lips squeezed firmly as though he were choking back tears, his hand shaking on the cross. The crowd became quiet as the profound link that had just been made public filled the air, not with melancholy. "You've got me all choked up," he said in a hoarse whisper. "I'd want to hear more." Karoline's eyes brightened with resolve as she nodded. "This isn't just my tale, Steve, so I'll tell you. It's about you and the contributions you make without even recognizing it." Steve Harvey sat with his hand gripping the cross and his breathing erratic, as if he had just been caught up in a tornado of feelings. His pulse pounded as Karoline Leavitt's account of how he rescued her from the shadows continued to reverberate. There was utter silence in the audience. The stage lights go out in front of this moment's rawness. Karoline's eyes were burning with determination, as though she knew it was time to push it to the limit. "Steve," she said in a low, furious voice, "I came for more than simply an old narrative. I'm here to tell you that, for young people like me, you are the spark that lights the path. Individuals who previously believed they were worthless. You gave me hope more than once. On days when I'm under pressure in the White House, I want to resign. I remember you not because of a video, but because of the way you live and how you never give up, no matter how many times life throws you down." With tears streaming down his cheeks, Steve gulped back a giggle. "You've got me crying too much, Karoline," he remarked, his voice cracking. She looked straight ahead and shook her head, saying, "I'm just a storyteller. How am I worth this? Every time I see you, Steve, I sense that you're worth it because you're genuine. You don't just act on stage, you carry your entire life with you. I have to make it too." Steve leaned back, hand over his mouth, tears hitting the table. The audience began to sob, some hugging each other, eyes red. Even on a screen, and where I work, when everything is in disarray and the press tears me apart, I tell myself, Steve slept in his car, got rejected, and he's still here. I never thought I'd be someone others looked to like that. Karoline leaned forward, her voice now full of emotion. "But you are, Steve. Don't you see? I'm not the only one." He whispered, his voice shaking. "You don't know what you're doing to me." Don't give up because of you." Steve took a deep breath, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Karoline, why me?" he asked, his voice almost a plea. "There are so many out there smarter, stronger. Why am I the one picked for this?" "They know you, but they see you wearing that cross, hear you talk about getting back up, and they believe they can, too." She smiled, her teary eyes shining. "Because when you talk about faith, I hear truth. Truth from someone who has fallen and gotten up. And that's the light you bring. Not with fancy words, but with who you are." Steve bowed his head, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking with uncontrollable sobs. "You don't try to be anyone else but yourself, Steve. You don't pretend to be perfect. Don't hide your scars." "I've never seen myself like that," she said, nodding as the tears streamed down her cheeks. "But I see it, Steve." "You've got me crying now," he added, attempting to grin through the tears. "You gave me more than just the strength to stand, and I want you to know that. At the White House, you gave me the courage to stand up for others. I consider you in every tough choice and every dispute with the media." In a tone that said, "You're melting me down." Steve shook his head and said, "Not to survive, but to triumph, to treat young people the way I used to be." Karoline queried him, her eyes blazing with hope. "But you talk about faith. In a setting like the White House, is it really that important? All that turmoil, all those difficulties. I learned that from your example, not from your preaching." Steve was at his breaking point. He stood up and walked closer, his arms spread wide, as if he wanted to give her his whole being. "Faith is what keeps me going when everything else fails, and I'm attacked. It's just a little belief, like your cross, nothing much." He hugged her tightly and whispered, "You don't know what you've done," in a stifled voice. She hugged him back, tears streaming down his shoulder, saying, "I'm just Steve, but you make me feel bigger than that. Steve, you are the spark for me and for all of us, and I will always remember you." The crowd held its breath, no one applauded, and tears were flowing freely. It was too important a moment to ruin. "You underestimate how wonderful you are." Steve Harvey sat with his eyes still red and his palm gripping the cross like an anchor in the middle of the wave of emotion that had just passed over him. He still had tears on his cheeks, but he decided not to wipe them away because he wanted them to be proof of what Karoline Leavitt had said. As she honored him by stating that he was a lighthouse for the younger generation and that he had given her the strength to face her darkness, he broke down live on TV. Even though there was gentle crying coming from the studio audience, no one dared to disturb the sanctity of this moment. Karoline's eyes were sparkling as she looked at him, but suddenly they were focused on something else, as though she had something even more significant to share with him. "Steve," she said, her voice tremulous yet resolute, "you have to realize that you changed me in more ways than one. You changed what I'm doing today, right now, at the White House, and I'm here to reveal something I've never told anyone on TV." "Karoline, what are you saying?" Steve asked in a gruff but curious voice, blinking in surprise and dropping his palm from the cross to the table as if he were bracing himself. "I just cried because of you. It started with you, so I want you to hear it. I didn't just get up and start working once I got over that difficult period, after the election defeat, and after those days when I felt inadequate." Karoline's smile was strong and tender at the same time, while his weak smile failed to hide the anguish still roiling beneath his attempts to joke. The audience started whispering as Steve leaned forward and arched an eyebrow. "What are you saying? I'm becoming anxious because of you." She stared at him, taking a moment to process the words. "I got up with a greater purpose, and because to you, that purpose is now being realized." She spoke more steadily after taking a deep breath. "Steve, after hearing your words of tenacity, and how God uses ordinary people to accomplish amazing things, I started to see my work differently. I wanted to be more than just a press secretary who answered questions and defended the president. I wanted to use my position to change the lives of young people. And I've started a new policy, a plan I'm pushing at the White House to help the younger generation find opportunities, find hope, no matter where they're from. Steve sat up straight, his eyes wide. "Hold on," he said, his voice full of surprise. "You're saying you're doing something big at the White House, and it came from me." People like me were ignored, questioned, and told they weren't good enough. "You're right, Steve," Karoline said, nodding, her eyes sparkling again. "I can tell you right now that this policy is a youth program, even if it isn't official yet. The system disregards those who have aspirations, but lack resources or connections. It's what I call an opportunity of the future generation. And the idea was born that night. I heard you over your line. If you are still living, God is not done with you. If I were given another chance, I thought, those little kids out there deserve it. You were the one who inspired me to start." The crowd could no longer control itself. Applause mixed with emotional shouts. As though shocked, Steve covered his lips for a while and shook his head. "Karoline," he said in a broken voice, "I noticed a lot of young kids left behind at the White House." She wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled quickly, asking, "What did you just say?" "You took my words and turned them into a policy for the whole country." "I didn't just take your words, Steve. I took your spirit, the spirit of not giving up, of believing everyone's worth something. They aren't given an opportunity. No one believes in them. But I do remember you. Remember that cross. And I tell myself that if Steve can do it, so can I. I'm actively advocating for the approval of this regulation so that hundreds of other young people may take a stand as I did." Steve dropped his head and re-grasped the cross, tears still pouring down his cheeks. His voice was suffocated as he mumbled, "You have no idea what you have done to me." "I'm just a dude on TV, Karoline. I never thought I'd be able to get my hands on something that big." She leaned toward him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You did though, Steve. And I want you to know that every time I defend our policies or stand in front of the media, you are on my thoughts. I think about that statement. Think about that cross. It also gives me the willpower to keep going. You didn't just transform me, you are changing a generation through me. I'm here to tell you that because you deserve to know it." Steve's red eyes looked up. "You've melted me down again," he said in a raspy voice, smiling despite the tears. "But listen, you talk about the younger generation. What do you think they need most in this world? I mean, you're doing this big thing, but what do you see they need to not give up?" Karoline asked him with hopeful eyes. "They need someone to have faith in them," Karoline remarked. "They need confirmation that failure does not mean the end, that they are still valuable in spite of what the outside world may believe. And you took care of it for me. Teaching me politics is not as essential as demonstrating to me that faith and belief can carry you far. With this policy, I give that back. You were the first, too." Steve shook his head, his palm trembling on the crucifix. "The only word that comes to me is thank you." His voice trembled as he replied, "You just took me to a whole new level. Thank you for letting me know that my efforts are valued." Karoline's eyes were still welling up, but she smiled. "No, Steve. I should be the one to thank you since you are more than just a host to me. My generation and I believed we could succeed because of you." The audience clapped again, louder than before, as if a wave of enthusiasm had swept through the studio. As he looked at her, Steve's eyes were still moist, but a new brightness had emerged, one of pride and comprehension. Karoline Leavitt's statement that he had crafted a new White House policy for the lost younger generation still plagued him. She sat across from him, tears running down her cheeks, but her eyes were burning with faith and gratitude. This was no longer a typical interview. It was now bigger and more revered. Steve took a deep breath and tried to keep his words in check. "Karoline," he said in a kind but subdued tone, "you just took me on a trip I never saw coming. I've been on stage for years saying all kinds of things, but I never believed my opinions could reach the White House and your generation." "I'm the one who needs to thank you, Steve," Karoline murmured, hastily wiping the tears from her cheek. "I don't know what to say, except thank you. You offered me more than just hope, and I know that as we sit here together today, we're speaking not just to one another, but also to all of the young people who are watching." Steve was listening, needing someone to believe in them. He slept in my car and thought I had nothing to offer. But, Karoline, you made me realize that all of my struggles and disappointments weren't in vain. Steve nodded, his eyes softening. "You're right," he whispered, his voice lowering. "I've been there, been that kid no one believed in. And Steve, that's what I want you to realize. You did not triumph only for yourself." "I look at you," she said, leaning closer him with bright eyes. "You conquered so others could too. I see a person who hasn't given up. I want you to know that you passed it on to me today. That person wears the cross to remind himself that faith is genuine, not to flaunt it." "Karoline," he began, his voice quivering, "you've made me feel like I just got the biggest gift of my life." He glanced up, his eyes still moist but with a peace. Steve dropped his head briefly, his palm grazing the cross, before raising his gaze. "I never thought I could touch someone like you, a young, intelligent person changing the country. However, you motivate me to rise and achieve more," she added, nodding as tears started to form in her eyes once again. Steve raised an eyebrow in curiosity as she said, "Then do it, Steve, because you already have. You just don't see it. And I want us to do something right now for everyone watching." She paused and looked at him gravely. "What activities pique your interest?" he asked in a quiet but ready voice. Karoline grinned and said, "I want us to stand together, you, me, and everyone here in the audience, to support the young people out there, the ones who feel they're not good enough, not strong enough," before standing up from her chair. Steve glanced at her and then stood slowly, his hand still on the cross, saying, "I want them to know that we believe in them and that they're not alone." He lifted a hand to the crowd and said, "Everyone stand with me," before replying, "All right," in a stronger tone. "Take Karoline's side." The audience rose one by one, and suddenly the entire studio stood silently, young and old, men and women, without applause or yelling, just the sight of hundreds of people standing together for something bigger. Steve looked around brightly, then turned back to Karoline. "You see that? You brought people together," he added, his voice quivering. "You just did what it took me a lifetime to learn." Karoline stood by him, grinning despite her tears, and said, "No, Steve, we did it together because you taught me that faith isn't just something you keep to yourself. It's something you share. Today, we are sharing it with all those in need." Steve stepped up and immediately embraced her, not in a host-to-guest manner, but rather as two individuals who had come together by hardship and hope. The crowd witnessed the sacred moment in silence as Karoline returned his hug, her tears streaming down his shoulder. Steve spoke in a raspy voice. "You're a gift, Karoline," as they parted ways, his hands still resting on the cross. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with gratitude, and said, "I never thought I'd be part of something this big, but you made me believe I can, and I'll never forget this moment." Following a holy moment that stunned the studio, Steve Harvey and Karoline Leavitt stood side by side on the Steve Harvey Show stage, just releasing a loving embrace. No one was seated, and the audience stood as though they wanted to hold on to the newly established bond. "Neither will I, Steve, because you didn't just give me light, you gave me a family right here, right now." "Folks," Steve remarked in a soft yet firm voice as he inhaled deeply and turned to face the crowd, his palm resting lightly on the cross. Even though his cheeks were no longer wet, his eyes were still sparkling with pride and thankfulness as the stage lights dimmed, perhaps to highlight the warmth that filled the room. Karoline's eyes were full with trust and optimism as she wiped away her tears and smiled rapidly. He stopped and gave Karoline Leavitt a kind smile, showing me that what I say and think is more than just words. It's hope, it's light, and it can change a whole generation. Today is the greatest present I've ever gotten, even though I've been on this stage for years and have met many individuals, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart." Karoline took a tiny step forward and nodded, her voice low but assured. "Steve, I must thank you. You gave me more than just the willpower to stand. I think we can do more for ourselves and others because of you. I want everyone present and observing to understand that if he can, if I can, then you can too." Steve chuckled. As if in accord, the audience began to applaud slowly and emotionally as he raised a hand, emphasizing each syllable. It was a really easy chuckle this time. "People, you hear her. This goes beyond a simple interview. There's a call. Listen to Karoline and me, young people who are having difficulties. You are not alone. You are valuable. And there's still hope if you're still alive." Steve looked to Karoline, his eyes gleaming. He continued, "I want to end today with something special," in a hushed tone. Karoline nodded, and the audience went still as well. Let's close our eyes for a moment, not for a long prayer, but to send a thought to those who need us most. Steve put his palm on the cross and closed his eyes. For a few period, the studio was silent, a time of solidarity and hope. He opened his eyes, grinned, and said, "Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Karoline. Today, we did something beautiful together." Karoline waved to the crowd, saying, "Thank you, Steve. And thank you, everyone. Keep believing. Keep walking." Steve held up a hand as the stage lights went out for the last time, revealing a photograph of a young politician and a host who together stoked an unquenchable flame of hope. Many young Americans can relate to the story's portrayal of Karoline Leavitt, a young White House press secretary, losing a congressional race and facing severe media criticism for her gender and youth due to cultural prejudices and pressure to achieve early. The anecdote, in which talk show host Steve Harvey breaks down after getting an emotional letter from Karoline Leavitt, captures a profound aspect of modern-day America, a country full of conflict, pressure, and rivalry, as well as tales of human connection and optimism. In a nation that is occasionally split by politics and culture, the audiences and their solidarity for underprivileged youngsters shows the strength of empathy and faith. Steve Harvey's cross and his words, "If you're still breathing, God's not done with you," serve as a beacon of hope for Karoline, enabling her to use her suffering as inspiration to advance the White House's Next Generation Opportunity policy. This lesson applies to modern-day America. When failure and criticism can easily break you, find people like Steve or crosses that remind you that your worth isn't in temporary setbacks. Turn suffering into action, like Karoline did with her policy. And don't be afraid to connect with others, like Steve and Karoline's embrace, to find strength. Lastly, keep in mind that, as Steve says, every breath is a chance to start afresh, regardless of where you are in this challenging American culture. To help us promote hope for the next generation, please click the subscribe box if Steve and Karoline's story resonated with you. We appreciate your time and hope to see you in the upcoming video, which will have even more poignant moments.